Thank you, Charlie. That's helped. Thank you, Mr. Bowditch, sir. You don't know, but you helped me too. Charlie grinned and went below, still muttering his words with the misplaced accent. One morning during their second week in Cadiz, when Nat was in Prince's cabin, Charlie came to them, goggle-eyed. "We've got him, sir! A French spy! I can tell by the way he talks." Captain Prince's mouth twitched. "Come, Mr. Bowditch." They went on deck. Charlie was right. The erect, soldiery-looking man did have a French accent. He was Count Mellevant, he told them, once of the French Navy. He had fled to Spain during the French Revolution. Nat knew that Charlie's sigh of disappointment came from his heels. Count Mellevant said, "I understand there's a scholar aboard this American ship who's interested in astronomy. A very great scholar who has discovered a new way to work lunars." Prince nodded toward Nat. "There's your very great scholar, Nathaniel Bowditch." Mellevant invited Nat to visit the new observatory at Cadiz. When the Count had gone, Prince bowed solemnly. "How do you do, scholar?" Nat laughed, but he felt the same warm flood of happiness he had felt when Dr. Holyoake called him an astronomer. He couldn't explain how he felt to a grown man, though. What was it to remember when he was 12 and found he'd never go to school again? Nathaniel Bowditch, indentured. He shrugged off the memory. That night, when he stood in the observatory, he wished he could tell Elizabeth what it was like to be there, looking through the telescope that seemed to bring the moon and stars close enough to touch. It was late when he returned to the Astrea, but he wrote to her, "You seemed very near when I looked at the moon, because I knew you could see it, too." He smiled at that sentence, pleased. Maybe he'd learn to say things the way he wanted to someday. "All hands on deck!" He heard the yell and jumped to his feet. Dimly, he realized he'd been hearing the boom of cannon in the distance. He hurried topside. The gunfire was coming from the British fleet. What had happened? Was Napoleon attacking? He was supposed to be somewhere in the Mediterranean. The deck of the Astrea was alive with action, men running to secure battle lanterns, to loosen the guns. Presently a boat approached them. A British officer came on board. He was smiling and almost too excited to talk. "Nelson has trounced Napoleon's fleet! In the mouth of the Nile! We've got him now! Bottled up in Africa!" So it was just a celebration. Tom Owens growled, "Secure your guns!" Nat smiled at the words. Tom sounded as disgusted as Lem Harvey would have been. The Englishman said again, "Bottled up in Africa! No more trouble with Napoleon! I hope." "What about the French privateers in the Mediterranean?" Prince asked. "We're standing out of Cadiz for Alicante soon." "Into the Mediterranean?" "It would be safer in convoy with our fleet." So the Astrea and some 400 other vessels started in a vast convoy guarded by British warships. It was not long before the lookout on the Astrea saw 3 small vessels dropping astern. Collins leveled his glass. The lagging vessels were American. "What are the fools up to?" he muttered. Prince studied them too. "They're too heavy laden to keep up. Scuppers under, the lot of them. Serve them right if—" Then he said, "Bring her about, Mr. Collins." "Aye, aye, sir." There was no hesitation from the first mate or from any of the crew as they fell to with a will to bring the Astrea about. They left the protection of the convoy and headed back toward the floundering little vessels. When the Astrea was close enough to speak the ships, Captain Prince hailed them. The Astrea, he told them, had 19 guns and a crew that could use them. Cheers rose from the little ships. Tom Owens swaggered and grinned. "One-man convoy, that's what we are." Nat smiled to himself. Lem Harvey wasn't the only man born for a fight. For 2 days the Astrea trimmed sail to the speed of the floundering vessels. Tom began muttering under his breath. What was the use, he wanted to know? Wallowing along with fools who didn't know how to sail? They Couldn't make 6 knots in a trade wind, he grumbled. They don't deserve... The lookout's sing-song, "Sail ho!" froze every man in his tracks. Then, with a glad bellow, Tom leaped for the guns. Captain Prince came on deck and leveled his glass. 3 of them, he said, in flying French colors. There was no doubt about the colors, or the intentions of the 3 ships. They were altering their course, bearing straight down on the Astrea. When the decks were cleared, the guns bowsed out. Prince went below with Nat. Prince opened the logbook and picked up a quill. "Better note this now," he said dryly. "Maybe a little rushed later." He made the entry and dusted the ink with sand. "We'll need someone in the powder room when things start," he said. Nat sat down and pulled off his shoes. He knew the danger of a scuffed nail striking a spark and setting off the powder. "I can take care of the powder room." Prince frowned and started to speak. Then he shrugged. "Why not? I was going to say we can't risk having our navigator blown to bits. You know, if the powder room gets a direct hit, it goes. But if the powder room's blown to bits, the Astrea won't need a navigator, will she? Carry on, Mr. Bowditch." He went topside. Nat went to the powder room, blinking in the gloom. The only light there came from a small round window into the next cabin. For a moment, Nat was disappointed. He thought of getting a little work done while he waited. He'd forgotten they couldn't risk candles or lanterns near the kegs and bags of powder. Johnny was there, sloshing down the floor with water. They say it helps some. Of course, if that tier of kegs got a direct hit. He shrugged and grinned. "Good luck, Mr. Bowditch, sir." Nat's eyes grew accustomed to the dim glow. It really wasn't too dark, he decided. And no use, just sitting there twiddling his thumbs till they needed him to hand up powder. He went to his cabin and got his slate and pencil. The next thing he heard was Prince's bellow. He started and jumped to his feet. "Aye, aye, sir. You ready for powder?" Prince said, "The Frenchies didn't like our guns. They got close enough for a good look, then crowded sail and cleared out. Tom's disgusted. Sorry I forgot about you and left you down here so long." "Long? Great guns, man, you've been down there 3 hours." "You're sure, sir?" Prince broke out in a roar of laughter that brought Collins below. Prince told him the joke. "I give up. I've been through a lot in my day, but I never before saw a man huddle on a powder keg and forget where he was for 3 hours. That's one for your letter to Elizabeth." Nat shook his head. "She might worry, sir." "Take my advice and tell her," Collins said. "You're married a long time, you know. And women always hear everything sooner or later. If you skip anything, some kind friend is sure to say, 'Did your husband ever tell you about the time?' So you tell her first, the way you want her to hear it." "Your husband." Nat smiled at the sound of that. He closed the powder room and dogged shut the door and went for his shoes. In his cabin he returned to his work. Nothing for him to do now until Alicante. They had been off Alicante about a week when a ship flying the American flag anchored near them. The Ember from Salem, Captain Gorman commanding. Nat hadn't realized how glad he'd been to see someone from home until Captain Gorman came on board the Astrea. Captain Gorman did not seem half so glad to see Nat. He nodded abruptly and said, "Captain Prince, I'd like to see you below." Nat felt his temper rising, but he shrugged off his anger. Captain Gorman probably had something on his mind. He'd be in a better mood after he had talked to Captain Prince. Charlie came to him, frowning with importance. "The captain's compliments, Mr. Bowditch. He'll see you below." When Nat entered the cabin, Prince said, "Sit down, Nat. Sit down, boy." Captain Gorman sat with his head bowed, his elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. Prince strode up and down the cabin a few turns. I'm not going to stand off and on about this, Nat. Elizabeth, your wife, is dead." Captain Gorman said, "That's all I know, Mr. Bowditch. A ship passed me that had left Salem later than we had. They gave me the word." Nat didn't know when they went out. He realized finally that he was alone and the cabin was growing dark. 8 bells sounded. He had offered to take the anchor watch. He went topside. Mr. Collins said, "You've been relieved, Mr. Bowditch." Nat thanked him and went forward to the bow. For a long time he stood there, staring at the sky. The moon rose and made a glittering path on the water. Nat found himself staring down into the water. How deep was it? He wondered. Charlie Waldo spoke at his elbow. "Mr. Bowditch, sir." Nat stiffened. "Yes? What is it?" "I need you, sir. Could you help me, please? This navigation I'm trying to learn." "Of course, Charlie. Come along to my cabin." For an hour he worked with Charlie over the problem that had stumped him, explaining this way and that, until the boy understood. "I have it now, sir. Thank you." "Thank you, Charlie Waldo. You may not know, but you've helped me too." He went topside again and found Mr. Collins. "I'll stand the next anchor watch," he said. "I don't seem particularly sleepy." Collins nodded. "Right, Mr. Bowditch?" He was silent for a moment. Then he went on quietly. "I remember when I lost my wife." Work helped.